Jonathan OJ was more than your average police officer. He was a K-9 unit dog handler and worked on SWAT operations for the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, with 18 years of experience and an intimidating frame. A stoic and dutiful man, standing at 6 feet and built like a brick house, he wasn't the kind of guy you'd want to mess with, and could definitely handle himself in a sticky situation. He'd been a paratrooper in the Special Forces prior to becoming a deputy, and his closest friends described him as tough as nails, serving arrest warrants, engaging in shootouts, and negotiating hostage situations with some truly volatile characters. He'd once scared off a 500-pound black bear during a camping trip with his father-in-law. All that's to say, he was no pushover. It was June 11th, 1998, a Thursday. In 2 weeks, Jonathan would be taking part in the Western States 100-mile endurance race. The run would take him around 20 hours to complete, and it was a long-held dream of his to qualify and compete in it, a true test of one's body and mind. He was going on daily runs to prepare for this challenge. One of his favourite spots to trek through was the Devil's Punch Bowl in the Antelope Valley of California. Jonathan knew the area well, having spent countless hours hiking and camping there over the years. He arrived there at 11:45 AM, spread a sunshade across the windshield of his truck, and set off for the day's run. Early into it, he came across a teacher and a group of students he had met before during a classroom visitation and talk. He told them he was going to run all the way to the summit of the 9,400-foot Mount Baden-Powell, and said that he'd be back around sunset. He wouldn't though. During that fateful day, Jonathan was spotted by 2 local camp employees making his way to the top of the mountain. At around 6 PM, a third employee spotted a man with a green backpack heading towards the parking lot where Jonathan's truck was parked. Not long after that, a local resident told a park employee he heard a single gunshot come from the punch bowl. 11 PM rolled around, and when Jonathan didn't return home that day, his wife became increasingly worried. She contacted the authorities and told them her husband was missing. A search and rescue operation was underway by 11:30. Jonathan's truck was found where he had left it, and it didn't look like anyone had tampered with it. Everyone who knew Jonathan was certain he was fine. They figured he'd just sprained his ankle or something, and that he'd soon come limping back heroically, like he always did. There was no question he could handle the harsh desert environment he was lost in. But when 24 hours passed with no trace of the guy, that certainty started to be replaced by doubt and worry. By the 3rd day, even more officers joined the hunt for Jonathan, and helicopters scouted the landscape from above. Horses, all-terrain vehicles, and thermal imaging equipment was brought in to help find him. The ravines and crevices were scoured with infrared technology. No expense was spared. Still, even with all this manpower behind the rescue operation, Jonathan was nowhere to be found. 2 weeks later, the day of the 100-mile endurance race came and went. Many still held out hope that he'd turn up for the event. He didn't. We don't know what happened to Jonathan on his run that day in June, but there are several compelling theories, ranging from someone taking Jonathan's life, Jonathan taking his own, and the potential that he simply vanished on his own accord to start a new life elsewhere. Let's examine those 3 possibilities. Firstly, if someone did kill Jonathan, who and why? He had definitely made some enemies during his years in the force, that's for sure, but what officer hadn't? If someone took Jonathan's life, then they certainly covered their tracks well, as there haven't been any official suspects to speak of since the case opened, and no evidence was found in the woods at all. Still, the fact that a local resident heard a gunshot moments after someone matching Jonathan's description walked into the parking lot, that's ominous to say the least. There were numerous meth labs set up around the Antelope Valley area back then. A tip even came in from an informant who said that Jonathan discovered something on his jog, and he, quote-unquote, was going to be a hero and was taken care of before being put in a hole. The validity of that tip remains unknown. Several corrupt officers were later discovered to be connected with the labs though, and were protecting the dealers in return for a share of the profits. One of Jonathan's colleagues, Darren Hager, was even kicked out of the force for trying to investigate if any corrupt officers were connected to his disappearance. Before heading out on his run that morning, Jonathan had said to his wife, "Have a nice life. Tell our daughter Chloe I love her." The couple's marriage was in disrepair. They'd been married for 12 years and were privately discussing divorce. At the time, Jonathan's wife assumed that those words meant he was checking out of the marriage officially. Now she believes they may have meant something more, and that he was cryptically letting her know he was about to end his own life. Jonathan's own family and co-workers, however, don't believe that's the case. They say he was a survivalist with a zest for life, and there's no way he'd abandon his daughter like that. A few of his friends remain convinced that he secretly returned to the military for a covert mission. Others, though, think that he may have escaped to Alaska, a place he'd always dreamed of living. It's not like he had a happy home life with his wife anyway. Perhaps he'd had an epiphany atop the mountain and decided it was now or never. His sister is sure that's the case. When she had last seen her brother, he was miserable with living in California, and, in her words, was ready to go, checked out, done. She believes he planned his whole vanishing, and that he had been stashing money away and building a new identity, that it all culminated on that day when he finally made it seem like he'd gone missing. Maybe Jonathan really is still alive and well, living in Alaska. Maybe that gunshot near the punch bowl was a coincidence and nothing more. Maybe we'll never know. Let's explore a mystery that's come to be known as the Chinese Hinterkaifeck. All you true crime fans out there will know what that means. On the morning of December 27th, 2007, 2 workers arrive for work at a family lime factory in Huanggang City, China. What they were confronted with when they opened the doors that day is hard to imagine. 8 of their co-workers, some of them their family members, were lying in various locations around the factory, completely butchered. They first discovered their boss's wife lying in a pool of her own blood at the gate of the lime kiln, her throat slashed open. Nearby was her husband, their boss, who appeared to have been stabbed multiple times in the neck and face. The 2 men desperately ran to the dormitory, hoping to find survivors. They only found more horror. Inside the dorms were the bodies of 5 more workers, including a married couple and their 9-year-old child. Detectives later found one final body in a ditch outside the factory. This individual was found near a motorcycle, and it seems likely he was trying to escape the carnage before being chased down and killed. Perhaps he crashed into the ditch by accident, or succumbed to a wound he sustained. Either way, his body too was full of puncture wounds. Nothing was taken from the factory. The investigators decided that the whole killing spree must have taken place between 8 PM the following night and 8 AM the morning they were discovered by the 2 men. It was determined that those 2 men only survived because they had their own local housing to go home to, and, unlike the other non-local workers, didn't have to sleep at the factory, a common practice in China. What boggles my mind most about this case, though, is that all 8 workers were killed by one perp, and they all died by the same blade. Can you imagine taking the lives of 8 people consecutively like that? How much rage and hate you'd have to have inside you. What on earth was this psycho's motivation? It appears as if he had a clear understanding of the factory's layout and knew to strike when the neighbouring cement factory was being particularly noisy so that nobody outside would hear the workers' screams. Perhaps he was a former worker who had a vendetta against the owner. Perhaps there was only one intended victim and everyone else was just collateral. The use of a knife makes it seem like the killer had a personal grievance to settle. But keep in mind that firearms are hard to come by in China, and slayings there often involve a more personal or creative instrument. For instance, one of the province's most infamous crimes was the murder of 17 via tractor in 2010. Still, how was this perp able to take out 8 people without anyone overpowering him or escaping? Did he attack them stealthily? Hold one of them captive for compliance? Was he an experienced assassin? Was he potentially working with the guy on the motorcycle, but turned against him in the end? In the weeks prior to it, the workers at the factory had reported that some of their possessions were disappearing and then reappearing in random places, as if somebody was coming in and moving them. Could this have been the work of the killer, messing with his future victims? In the 5 years leading up to this case, Chinese forensics and analysis improved leaps and bounds, and the investigators were able to determine that their suspect was 5'5" and wore EU size 40 leather shoes. Despite learning that information, the investigation turned up no suspects, and all these years later, the authorities have no clue who took the lives of those 8 workers, or why they did what they did. Born and raised in Manchester, New Hampshire, Lorraine Ann Rann lived a pretty ordinary life for a young teenager. A student at Parkside Junior High, she made good grades and was well liked by her classmates. Back in 1980, she lived with her mother Judith in a 3rd-floor apartment on Merrimack Street. On April 26th of that year, Judith was out of town with her boyfriend. He was a professional tennis player and was taking part in a big tournament. Usually Lorraine would have to join them, but this particular evening, she asked if it would be okay to stay home alone. Judith agreed, saying that she'd be back around midnight and to stay out of trouble. That night, Lorraine secretly invited 2 of her best friends over to the apartment to hang out. 1 male, 1 female. The 3 of them sat around drinking Lorraine's mother's wine and having a good night. Sometime into the evening, however, the male friend said he could hear voices coming from the hallway outside the apartment. Worried that it was Lorraine's mother coming home early and that they were about to be caught drinking, he hurried out the back door. Lorraine locked the door behind him. Well, Judith didn't come in, so it clearly wasn't her making the noises outside. The 2 young ladies, now alone, thought nothing of the sounds their male friends supposedly heard, and they both went back to drinking and enjoying themselves. Sometime around 1 AM, Lorraine's mother Judith finally arrived back home. She noticed that the light bulbs in the hallway on all 3 floors of the apartment building had been unscrewed and everything was dark. Now that was strange. Stranger still, the front door to her apartment was already unlocked. She entered and popped her head into Lorraine's room. There, she saw her sleeping in her bed. Exhausted, Judith got into her room and fell asleep. The next morning, Judith made a horrific discovery. The girl sleeping in Lorraine's bed wasn't Lorraine. It was her friend who had passed out from all of the wine. Lorraine was gone. Her clothes, brand new sneakers, and purse were in the living room, and the back door was wide open, something Judith hadn't noticed when she'd arrived home. The friend said that she had last seen Lorraine sleeping on the couch. Judith remembered the unscrewed light bulbs in the apartment hallways, and immediately she imagined the worst. She called the authorities immediately. 3 months passed by, and Lorraine was still missing. On October 1st, her mother Judith found that she had been charged for 3 California phone calls. She didn't have any friends or relatives who lived in Cali. 2 of the calls had been made from a motel in Santa Monica to another motel in Santa Ana. The 3rd call was placed to a teen support hotline. Judith was sure it was her daughter who had made those calls. The doctor who operated the hotline at first denied knowing anything about it, but in 1985, he changed his story. This doctor said that runaway girls occasionally visited his wife at their home for intimate health checkups, and that at around that time in 1980, one of the young women may have been from New Hampshire. He said that a woman named Annie Sprinkle may have more information about Lorraine's vanishing. The cops tracked her down. Annie Sprinkle was formerly a movie star of the more explicit variety, let's put it like that, and detectives sifted through all of her movies in an attempt to spot Lorraine. They found no evidence linking Sprinkle to Lorraine's disappearance. A private investigator hired by Lorraine's mother also learned that a man known only as Dr. Z may have used one of the aforementioned California motels to make several movies using underage actors, though ultimately this lead also resulted in nothing. It's never been categorically proven that Lorraine was ever at those motels, or that she made those 3 phone calls. For years after Lorraine disappeared, Judith frequently received mysterious phone calls. They always came at around 3:45 AM, and the caller would only breathe into the receiver. The frequency of these calls always increased around the Christmas holidays, and the unidentified person on the other end of the line never said a word. The identity of this mystery caller remains unknown to this day. 5 years after Lorraine's disappearance, the male friend who was hanging out at her apartment that fateful night took his own life. he was never considered a suspect in Lorene's disappearance. Perhaps the strangest thing about this case is this. 6 weeks after Lorene's disappearance, Denise Denault, a young woman who lived only 2 blocks away from Lorene, went missing from a bar in Manchester. Despite their age difference, Denise and Lorene closely resembled each other. That seems like a massive coincidence. Could the 2 cases be linked in some way? This picture shows what Lorene might look like now if she's still alive. She stands at 5'4", has brown hair, blue eyes, and a prominent scar on her upper leg. If you have any information pertaining to her case, please contact the Manchester Police Department. Back to Asia for this last one. A little known mystery that caught my attention. It really resonates with me because it happened in a city I used to call home. Hong Kong. Annie Ashekian was a bright soul. A paralegal with a free spirit, she loved nothing more than travelling the globe and getting into adventures. By the time she turned 30, she'd already explored around 30 countries, mostly solo. When she turned 31 back in 2008, Annie was ready to jet off on a new expedition, this time with 2 of her friends. She'd just returned home to Canada after holidaying with her boyfriend. That's when her pals told her about a trip to China they had planned. She made a spur-of-the-moment decision to join them. Her family found that a little out of character. Sure, Annie loved to travel, but she was more of the planning type of gal. The type who spent weeks deciding where she wanted to go, what her itinerary would be, researching which restaurants to eat at. Nevertheless, 2 days after arriving back home, she flew from Toronto to Beijing with her 2 companions, with the intention of exploring as much of China as possible. She was slated to return home via India in December. But something happened to Annie during that spontaneous trip. Something nefarious. And, for reasons that still remain unclear, she disappeared entirely. And today, 12 years later, her whereabouts and well-being remain unknown. Let's go over the details. Annie and her friends landed in Beijing on October 25th. Their first week there went according to plan, with the 3 of them exploring the city and the surrounding areas. On Friday, October 31st, that all changed. At 12:30 AM, in the early hours of Halloween, Annie upped and left the hotel she was staying at with her travel companions. The 2 other girls didn't think this was unusual. Annie liked to go off by herself and explore at her own pace, and they just assumed she was still jet-lagged and couldn't sleep, but she wanted to do something more interesting than lie around in bed restlessly. Later that morning, Annie returned to the hotel room. Here's where things get strange. After returning, she took a bath, had a coffee, and, strangely, packed up all of her things and checked out of the hotel alone, without telling either of her friends what she was doing, where she was going, or why she was leaving. That was the last time either of them saw Annie. Like I said, the young globetrotter liked to travel solo, but it didn't make sense that she'd just pack up and leave without so much as a goodbye or an explanation. This troubled her friends, who both tried to contact her. Annie never replied to their calls or messages. Here's what we know. Sometime between October 31st and November 8th, Annie travelled to Xi'an by train, a journey that takes roughly 5 hours. Xi'an is one of China's most popular tourist destinations, so no major cause for concern just yet. On Wednesday, November 5th, Annie sent a final email from her Hotmail account. After this, she never sends another email again. On November 9th, Annie caught a plane from Xi'an and arrived in Hong Kong. The following day, there was an unconfirmed sighting of her at a place called Chungking Mansions. Now, I've been to Chungking Mansions myself. Over the years, it's cleaned up a little bit, but back then, it was known as the ghetto of Hong Kong. When I went, I was literally swarmed by aggressive people when I walked inside, all of them trying to sell me all sorts of stolen or illegal goods. Hong Kong was a really safe place when I was living there, but that was one of the few places everyone knew shady stuff was going down at. I can only imagine things were even worse back in 2008. Now, this sighting was unconfirmed, but if Annie really was there, Was she visiting the mansions as a tourist? Staying in one of the really cheap hostels there? Or was her visit there for some other reason? On November 11th, Annie was caught on CCTV at Causeway Bay, withdrawing 2,800 Hong Kong dollars from an ATM. That's around $350 US. She appeared calm on the tape. At 8:30 AM that day, she sent her sister a text message saying to wish her niece a happy birthday. That was the last communication she had with any of her loved ones. On December 15th, Annie was scheduled to catch a plane from India back to Canada. She never made that flight. In fact, the records show that she never made it out of Hong Kong at all, not through an airport at least. Around Christmas, there was another unconfirmed sighting of Annie in Hong Kong's Wan Chai area. Wan Chai is a very seedy part of Hong Kong, the kind of place where they sell love by the hour. Despite its low crime rate, Hong Kong was, and still is, infamous for being a transit point for human trafficking. It's possible that her supposed sighting in Wan Chai could mean she herself was a victim of trafficking, but that doesn't explain her strange behaviour leading up to her ultimate disappearance. It doesn't seem like she was forced to abandon her friends, then travel to Xi'an and then to Hong Kong, and it doesn't seem as if she was stressed at all in the video footage captured of her. Still, that unconfirmed sighting is the last piece of possible evidence we have, and where the trail for this particular case goes cold. What happened to Annie? Was she sold into servitude, or did she disappear on her own accord? Why did she so uncharacteristically leave her friends in Beijing without so much as a goodbye? Annie had a great career back in Canada, a happy relationship with her boyfriend, and the pair of them had bright future plans to move to Argentina together. It's so sad that that all went to waste. As of today, none of Annie's belongings have ever been recovered, and the authorities are no closer now to finding her than they were back then. Hey guys, Lazy here, and thank you very much for listening. Well, I hope you enjoyed these mysteries. I had a fun time collecting them and researching them, so hopefully I did them some justice. And if you have any other mysteries that you'd like me to cover in the future, please let me know down below in the description. In the comment section, that'd be more helpful. And maybe, just maybe, I'll be able to get around and cover them at some point for you guys. I'm always on the lookout for some new hot topics, so any leads you guys give me is always appreciated. Before this video ends, I'd just like to say a huge thank you to all of my supporters, especially my biggest supporters here on YouTube and over on Patreon. Mathew J. Bauer, Phantom Knight, Michael Moon, Alicia L, Aura Dragon 1, TheOnlyDorita, Lord 210, Azrael Warakai, Silas Gheist, Infamous-senpapi, Sieg, ghostsiren, Connor Louthan, Kelly Rocco, Darius Saffaie, Kelly Rocco again, Nadine, Sloane Crawford, Sarah Ramirez, AnimeWimp, Martin Vatland, Gina Valera, ProCupidineNata, Philip Westre, Alex Greensall, Tom King, Charles Wilson, Monica Mendoza, and Crawford K McDonald. Thank you guys so much for your continued support. It really helps the channel out. Anyway guys, be sure to smash that like button or I'll smash you. Follow me over on Twitter, Instagram, all that jazz, and you'll hear from me again very, very soon. Until then, you all stay spooky. And remember, the best things happen in the dark.